Hi, my name is Thiago Pinto Barbosa.
I'm Melanie.
My name is Andrew Gilbert.
My name is Anna Shaheen.
My name is Ayman Jubrair.
I'm Carla Maya.
My name is Dina Flug.
My name is Max Payman.
My name is Ignacio Farias.
Hi everybody, I'm Judith Albrecht.
The two of us were the only one, I think, really presenting a multimodal PhD here in the Institute.
But did they still expect you to write a thesis of 200, 300 pages? Or here?
As a PhD?
Or was there like something like, okay, because you're doing an exhibition, we expect, shorter thesis? No.
No, the minimum, I think, to really, here in the university, I think is 200. A PhD in general in the Humboldt.
So they didn't change anything for you because you're doing an exhibition?
No. All that was extra, and I'm even surprised, that my supervisor, was interested in all that.
But this is exactly, for example, where I would argue for in visual anthropology, for example, the written piece has to go into a dialogue with the film. No?
But I have the
you have it in your written piece.
Complete dialogue.
Yes.
That was the deal we.
But the logic of the institution is still that you could just hand in a PhD without them watching your exhibition.
Yeah.
And this is something we want to change, right? Yeah. To say that's exactly, you write about something and then people say that's enough for us. Thank you. Great that you're doing this exhibition, but this is enough for us. So how do we push the boundaries to say, no, this is exactly not how we understand it, no? It's interesting.
There is a complete distrust of pleasure and aesthetics within academia, just a complete, that is not only wasteful, it's actually dangerous, because you could, I guess the presumption is that you could, by the beauty of the work, undermine the truth of the work or something like that in the Kantian sense. There's there's this specter of seduction that is there, which is interesting to think about. But I think it's so central, maybe the problem is that it's so central to the subjectivity of so many of the people within the university, where they've trained themselves to believe that they are these kind of brains without bodies that are completely immune to beauty, to use the broadest possible terms, that if you suggest that there is a space for beauty, aesthetics, whatever, then they're like, wait, this is actually like an ontological threat to my sense of self. And I've certainly seen that sometimes on committees.
I think that's, so I don't know. I think that's right, and I think one of the lucky things, I imagine cultural studies make space for this. Anthropology certainly has the capacity to, because as soon as you say something like, what something means is related in part to how we feel about it, then you're opening up feeling as a vehicle for communication, understanding the phenomenon, and so on. And but there is a long history, you're absolutely right, of distrusting feeling and the passions and so on.
But at the same time, I think the case of anthropology is very particular, because since the crisis of ethnographic representation that was performed by different people in different ways since the 80s on, the whole discipline has been experimenting with how to write differently and how to write beautifully and how to write kind of in a collaborative way, how to write from situated positions, so in an engaged way. So I think that in anthropology there's been this kind of 40 years now, or even longer, of, the history of experimentation with writing is much longer, but at least for the last 40 years has been part of the mainstream of what anthropology is supposed to do, is to experiment with that, right? And when students now submit here a dissertation, MA, PhD, which is kind of written as a standard scientific article, we'll say, this is okay, but they will pass, but they will not get an outstanding grade for. So So actually experimenting with form a little bit, and then of course, in this time, a lot of conventions have emerged. So it's not just inventiveness, but also new conventions emerge with regards to how you are supposed to bring your situatedness, your body, your feelings, the poetic or all that into the text. So we could also critically engage with how this is done. But I just wanted to say that I think anthropology is very unique in that regard.
But would you say that's true of German anthropology?
Yeah, so this is our first activity in the workshop, and what we're doing is we are, from the perspective of our individual research projects, detailing, identifying, and elaborating the various affordances from the perspective of usually the media format. In my case, that is the comic or graphic ethnography. And after identifying the affordances, we kind of switch perspectives and try to imagine what would an evaluator who wants to be able to identify those affordances, like how would you bring them into awareness of what those affordances are, particularly for those who aren't familiar with that media form. So in my case, somebody doesn't have any kind of idea about what the comics format affords. How can we bring someone into awareness without having them read like 5 books on, the grammar of comics, etc.
Somehow you need to set up traps and kind of, translations. If I look at our department, maybe yes. But as soon as we go one step farther and we think about the faculty, or we think about the larger kind of, this is not a supporting environment for this type of experimental practices in the radicality that we are thinking them. They might support this as a transdisciplinary research or as a sort of science communication activity. They love it.
Yes.
If this is how you frame it, they will support that. But supporting this as let's say, the first mission, namely research, they don't see that. So I don't know. I see the point that you can use this infrastructure and use the institution to support these sort of things, but this is something that we do by navigating.
Yeah, definitely.
There is this kind of pressure from funders, from maybe the institution, to see certain collaborators as just service providers, right? Like the artist that you are working with does not have an epistemic role, does not have a role in the production. It's just kind of like a facilitating kind of role, and how we have to hack that as well.
Yeah, and then we have, this goes down to very bureaucratic details, but the only way of paying these people is by setting up a contract of services.
Yeah.
And this contract of services forms are already pre-existing, and you have to use the form that the university has. And there it says that all the intellectual property of the things that are provided by the service providers remains in the ownership of the university. So I've had, even with people like, we did this website for the Wave Mat, a project we're dealing with waves. It's a very kind of wavy, cool website. And the designer was like, of course not. She created or kind of a typography for it, which is called Wavy. And she was like, no, this is my property. I allow you to use it for this site, but this is my, so we had to kind of create a whole new contract. Yeah, because otherwise the standard kind of contract is service provision and all the products of that service, like imagine someone doing a transcription, the one who owns the transcription is you, not the service provider. And the same applies for all artists, designers, and so on in the standard way of doing things. It's horrible. It's really problematic.
Yeah. I guess I think that we're trying to do sort of two things here. And one of them is that I think everyone's realizing that producing high quality knowledge about the world is not just a matter of doing formal studies and writing academic research papers, that there's lots of other ways of thinking about what's going on, sharing information about what's going on in the world, including graphic novels, including games. So on the one hand, we're trying to figure out how to make that work legible and valued within the university. If you make a game, if you make a comic or a graphic novel, how can that actually be valued by this institution that we're in? And at the same time, how can we take the best of this institution and bring it to bear on these multimodal ways of working, so that we get the community of serious attention and the encouragement to try and fail and do better, and we get the kind of thorough intellectual community that will enrich those practices as well.
We tease that on, or we share our questions and our thinking. Who needs to be present in the room? Like, what kind of bodies are present in the room to actually be able to evaluate? And this, of course, goes back to the maker, that they also have to ask themselves, who could evaluate my work? That's something that you also just said, which again is who's using that kit. So it goes in a couple of directions, I guess. So that's something that we talked about. Not anthropology Anthropology shouldn't be the one discipline working with that. It should go beyond, and that's also where maybe interesting conversations can be had. Because as Carla, for example, you said your work always ties into sound studies. So who do I want to have a conversation with in sound studies? Could this person be on board with evaluating this? Could they be a part of the reviewing process, whatever? So I think it's about thinking about the structure of evaluation. And then another thing that we were thinking about, or wondering, or maybe that's a question to the project itself, is what are the next steps of evaluating the toolkit itself? And we understand the timing of this project, but what happens afterwards? And when we're talking about design, like a prototype needs to be ripped apart and then be put together again, and then needs to be revised. And currently, from what I understand, is that the workshops are taking place more in silos of certain kinds of people and interested parties. But what happens once those people are brought together? What do they do with it? How does it change? Could there be, if this is a follow-up project thing, we think that probably the same amount of time needs to be invested for revising the prototype and actually figuring out if that makes sense or not, and seeing it in practice and then adapting it.
This idea multimodal is nothing new. It already existed, but exists differently today. Yeah, because it's not new that the body is not new in the discussion in anthropology, and it's sometimes we tend to forget. I mean, I'm looking back, to all the grandes dames who wrote about vulnerability and taking the body as reference point of analysis, and I'm sometimes asking myself, like, it already exists, it's not that we are doing something so amazingly new. And I sometimes don't understand why a lot of discussions cut off this reference point to the past. And then I'm asking myself, is the problem because we are now in the context of decolonization? So taking, let's say, the achievement of post-colonial theory and feminism was positionality in a way, to say, like, hey, we have to position ourselves and we don't speak in universal terms, and so on and so on. I mean, to simplify it. Yeah, but now we are at the next step, and now we have this, we include affects and emotions, and we need to ask ourselves, why did we have excluded it in the first place, and not promoting it as something like, this is so amazing that we do that. I mean, we know in all research, neuro research, trauma research, so many researches, that body and mind cannot be disconnected how it was done theoretically. And then we also need to follow an epistemic disobedience, and this needs to be beyond text, because text is so problematic also because it was done in a specific way, and divides European knowledge production from very different ways of knowing and being in the world. So I'm sometimes asking myself to be humbled, yeah, also means that we put ourselves in a tradition that people already existed and connect with, let's say, our anthropological ancestors in a way, rather to overcome them all the time and to say like, yeah, we are doing something new, because we don't.
I mean, it's just boring methodological writing is boring writing, and whether the method is new or multimodal or not, it's if we learn anything from ethnographic writing, is to thread all that together in a storytelling form. So I feel it's a problem with writing in general and not related to explaining multimodality in particular. Any form of boring explanation is boring. We should all disclose ourselves as researchers in a certain project. Of course, it doesn't always start with like, I want to make research about. Sometimes it starts with like, I'm a part of a group, or I'm an activist here, or I'm of an encounter. But when this point flips, it becomes an ethical question, right? That it's not necessarily then, an academic book is not equally valuable for all parties here, right? Like, it's not even accessible to all the parties. So
yeah, can I respond? Because that's what we meant also, thinking about what is the value for people who are collaborating, who are outside of academia, and that should be something that should be taken into consideration. Otherwise, you know, if we're just pushing for collaborations but not think, okay, what's the purpose of that collaboration for other people that is not in academia, right? So I think that's something that should be taken into account when valuing or assessing this kind of projects. Yeah.
These 2 days has been very intense. Workshop 2 was
Generative.
an explosion of different
collective processes of
Broken prototypes.
thinking through a plurality of voices.
perspective of what is multimodal today.
So the one word that I thought about is a horrible word, but I like it, is transdisciplinarity.
Affordances.
working together.
Thinking through multimodality as a transdisciplinary field.
They like us, so they ask, why don't you like us?
Connect these different problem areas or problem spaces that we had identified with different questions.
It's the economy, stupid.
This is so valuable.
Inspiring.
So I'm extremely tired and inspired.
I think I will have a couple months to really reflect on. So yeah, thank you, Stadt Labor.
The double wow.